So basically, these two dots that you see represent that old, how do we get from A to B or here to there metaphor. Ken Hurley, I guess you're on the call. Good to know that. We chatted once before, I guess, maybe twice. And I hope you've gotten out of the snow in Boston, Ken. So the two dots, they're a simple metaphor. Where we are now, where we're going next. What's impossible? What's possible? What does your manager want? I'll encourage you to take some notes. If you're a yellow legal pad person, whatever your style might be, as we progress. So here are some objectives. Some folks like to see a little slide with objectives. We're going to talk about talent management broadly. To get there, we need to define some terms. We'll talk more specifically about data and analytics. I'm going to give you 3 examples, and then I'm going to debunk these 4 myths. And last time when I did this talk, I've done it a couple times, folks immediately jumped on D, letter D. Consultants add value? Really? So let me respond to that. I think consultants should add value. I think they don't always. We don't always. I've been a consultant for a long time, over 20 years. So this is not a salesy webinar. It's meant to be sharing some best practices and content, and invite you guys to share as you need in the future. So whatever your next steps are, no idea. So what do you measure? This is perhaps an opportunity if you were able to chat your comments or add your comments to the chat, then William will help lift them up or verbalize them. I've learned with some meetings that we hold here that not everybody measures the same thing. We all measure different things. Sometimes number of days through our vacation, or how far we're tracking on sales leads, or our bonus, or calories on a Fitbit measure. So I'd be curious, what do you measure? And invite you to think about that. Secondly, what would make the webinar outstanding for you? And the third, maybe objective would be what would make this webinar outstanding for your organization. So I understand that nobody's live on the call, but if somebody were to chat, Kat is now in the room, and Kat will monitor your chats. Say hello, Kat.
Hello.
You have some chats?
Jill says that she measures turnover, the number of high potentials, and engagement and performance ratings.
Oh, you're going to fit right in. Engagement and performance ratings. Excellent. Thanks. Anybody else?
That's all I see.
All right. So know that you're very representative, Jill. We also do a lot of work here with turnover and hypos, and Kat's really one of the experts on that, so we'll get to that in a second. So who are we? Right? Here's this bozo named Doug. I'm hiding in the back, and you know I've got 3 women who tell me, guide me on things to do and what to do next. Kat, why don't you say something about who you are and what you do here and all that?
I'm the Director of Client Services. I work with a number of our current clients on different research initiatives, turning their data into action, kind of helping move the needle on their turnover, engagement, those kinds of metrics.
And you're brilliant, and you graduated from Vanderbilt, and you've been here how long?
I think about 5 or 6 years.
It's a blur, huh?
Am I moving your slide?
Yes, please.
Okay, I think
So Kat's moving the slides and catching up on the slide that says Talent Management Overview. So if you're on the call, you're already a select group of people, Beth and Ken and Jill. You know that it's a huge, economically, a huge industry. $6 trillion market, according to U.S. corporations' labor expenses. Just technology is $15 billion. Several of these deals you might be aware of and have announced. But the line in bold is what I want to focus on. This, to me, is the compelling reason to be on this call. The greatest expense for most companies is people or payroll, and it ranges from 30% to 60% of gross revenue. And that's only half of the statement. It's 100% manageable. So Kat and I just left a meeting with our small company, and we know roughly what the gross revenue is and the fact that we can manage some of those expenses. And some of you may have the same capacity to know what it is you can manage. I hear sometimes that executives can't sleep at night, Well, it's true for all of us, I think, but talent management is something that we can invest in and make some intentional decisions about. So to me, the bolded point is the reason why we're on the call. Kat, any comments as we proceed?
No, I agree.
I know you do. So how do we define this thing called talent management? There's 4 ways to view it: financially, psychologically, organizationally, and strategically. Imagine you've got Sally, who works in your company. There's a cost and a benefit for having Sally in your organization. There's a psychological aspect. She's got tremendous strengths and huge capacity. Organizationally, we might know what her behavioral impact is, and we might know individually what her huge impact is. And strategically, we might know what is it that Sally could do now and what could she do in the future. So I think the fact that there's at least these 4 views of talent management make it sloppy and hard to talk about. If you look at the recent adoption of these phrases, you'll see talent management used a lot in white papers, everywhere from Person at Deloitte to McKinsey. I read a lot of these things. So we're going to use them synonymously as human capital and talent management. So the competencies are the behaviors. What is it you look for? In a salesperson, I want to know that they can communicate well. An accountant, that they have great analytical skills. There's a recent study in the Inc. 500 which looked at the top 3 competencies for those CEOs. You may not be surprised, but risk-taking is a competency. I did my graduate work on risk-taking, and business focus is a competency. Their capacity to focus on X and Y and Z, whatever those outcomes. And determination, the extent to which people persevere when they're a little bit frustrated. So these are examples of competencies. We'll give you some more in a minute. What's consulting? Improving the client's condition. Very broad definition. These are the results that are met from a new value, objectives met, validated. Think about who you go to for advice. Your doctor, your physician, an accountant, and where you get those referrals from. Which leads to this thing called evidence-based consulting. What do? We take the data and we go from that first dot to whatever the next decision might be. Think about the last time you bought a car or a house. A pretty big decision for most of us. So here's a slide that we developed to describe what we do. This is as salesy as we're going to get on this presentation. It's not anything we own. But you see the dots. We're moving from a perceived current state to a needs assessment of a future state to some solutions or recommendations. So when Kat and her colleagues have provided research data for 12 or 13 years, it's all quantitative and qualitative. It's valid. It's an example of external data, and you all have internal data. I know you do, Ken and Proficient. And our goal is to complement what you've got with what we've got. I've been an executive coach for over 20 years. I've never met a senior leader who says, I've got enough info, Doug. That's fine. Just stop. I don't need any more data. And the reason is we all need to move from one dot to the next. You'll see that analyze impact, these 3 words, effectiveness, efficiency, and outcomes, in a minute, because this is a metric or a formula that's being used by more and more smart companies. So I want to give you a slide in a minute that helps us do that. So William's back. Any chat, conversation, or questions from our folks?
No, we're good to go. Should be.
And no way to open up the line so we can actually hear people?
No, they have all the information necessary.
Okay. So if they want to contribute, they can contribute. So please don't be shy, because I want to know your stories. I want to know, you'll see this slide a little bit later. What do you have in your organization? How do you gather your data? How do you need to solve whatever problems? In other words, how do you think you could connect the dots? And then how do you know that? How do you measure the impact? This is essentially what Kat and I do as consultants. So the next few slides, I'm going to give you 3 stories of examples. Pop in any time, partner. So this is a formula. I used the example before of the fact that your people costs range broadly from 30% to sometimes 60 or 70% of your total cost. So I've got three examples. If your gross revenue is $3 million and you've got 10 employees at a tech company, well, maybe they're at $80K if you add up their salary and compensation. So that cost, $800K divided by $3 million, your gross revenue is 27%. Well, that's on the low range for a tech company. That's why the margins in tech companies are what they are. That's why their salaries can be what they are to develop and retain people. Second example is a manufacturing company. We've all done lots of work at manufacturing companies. Well, if you've got 40 employees now and their compensation is lower, down to $60K, you're at $2.4 million. So your costs are that divided by the $3 million gross revenue. In other words, 80% your cost of talent management. This is what I said in the opening slide. So in your company, the little red arrow, you'll get these slides later, but I invite each of you, Beth and Ken and Jill, to fill in the blanks. And it could be the gross revenue for your division, something you can manage, the number of people in that group. Make up a number. That's what I did. 60K or 80K are just made-up numbers. And you can fill this out quickly. It's really helpful to do this when you're talking to your CFO or a business line leader, and you need to show the cost-benefit analysis. Jill says, our problem is data analysis paralysis. You are not alone, Jill. I appreciate your insight. And one take is, something simple like this can sometimes get through to some of those people. A simple formula. In the proposals I send out, I do a cost-benefit analysis, and I show them the return on investment.
I'm going to say, Jill, if you're not alone from the struggle I work with a lot of my clients on is having so much information, so it's really about focused effort. And to Doug's point, sometimes it's looking at a cost-benefit analysis of, a bigger department that might have a little bit lower turnover than a smaller department that has turnover through the roof. You might, use this cost-benefit because you're losing more people at that bigger department, so that's where we focus. And then in 90 days, maybe we focus somewhere else. So it's kind of more about getting in a good cadence of focus, and then I think that sometimes helps with the paralysis.
It does. I'm also of the opinion that you, Jill, are a leader at your company, not just because you're on this call, but because we want to give you some tools so you can argue for the changes you want to implement ahead. Here's an example. There's a publicly traded company near us in Nashville that you might know called Tractor Supply. And like your companies, the missions and values are stated online. The objectives are stated somewhere, typically online. And they might also have issues and challenges that are available. And if you look at their SEC comments, sometimes you'll see, well, what are the learning objectives that they might want? These are examples of talent management initiatives. So when they came to us and said in November, December, we want a leadership development process, I said, no, we're not going to provide a transactional program that's delivered every third month to your high potentials. It's an ongoing process. And it is the case that we know at many companies what the problem areas are by locations. We know names of people who are problems. And we can use that data to help everybody make a more informed decision. That's an example of, I think, using talent management to help make informed decisions. It's kind of weird not getting feedback later. Here's a second example. Whatever technology you've got, here's some example of technology that we've got. It's incredible. So we can use quantitative and qualitative data. Kat, you're an expert on this, to look at the cost of turnover. And sometimes that really gets people's attention.
Absolutely.
So if I said to any of you, your annual cost of turnover is $71 million, and we recommend, and that's a conservative number, and we can explain all that, a 15% reduction would be a savings of $10 million. And then I asked, so Ken or Jill or Beth, what's the value of this investment ahead? Is it, in fact, any fraction of $10 million? For instance, a $1 million investment, if it had a 1 to 10 yield, would that be well received by your line leaders or your senior execs? So, Jill, that's the kind of example I invite you to get through the paralysis. Here's another one. There's a trend from descriptive data to predictive data. Speed to competency is one example that could be measured in these different ways. Here's another one that I referenced a bit ago. Efficiency, effectiveness, and outcomes. I predict that we will see this as a framework or template in future business plans. When any of us, the 6 of us, are presenting information, I predict that we will be asked to determine the metrics that say something about efficiency or effectiveness. To what extent are we actually doing what we said we wanted to do? And what are the outcomes? How do we know that this, for instance, this leadership development program, in fact influenced the business metrics? So this is a formula that you will see the Center for Talent Reporting has developed, and they've stolen it and tweaked it and improved upon it with many others. So back to this slide. I invite you to think, it's the same slide I showed you 8 minutes ago. What's your story? You've got data, just like the 3 examples I just shared. The question to me is, how do you solve your problems? How do you connect the dots? How do you use your internal expertise and us or any external expertise? And then how do you measure the impact? So I invite you to jot some notes before we get to the bulk of this, which is myths and facts. Ted, I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there a story that comes to mind from any of your current clients or phone calls this morning?
I mean, yeah, I mean, there's, I think it's just without, getting into too much detail, a lot of it is just, using the data, as I mentioned, to help us figure out, where we need to focus. And then heavily qualitative data can oftentimes have the solution in itself. So typically, a mixture of external fact-finding from the data as well as using the data, to build that solution. And then, again, it's all about tracking. So back to that cost of turnover, if we, have a turnover rate and a cost per termination, and we see, well, here's where we started in 2014, and then we, use the data to implement those solutions in 2015, where do we end? And hopefully you'll get to see that, decline over time.
I bet you've seen that because you worked with some of these folks for 4 years or more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, so let's look at some of these myths and facts. I had a hard time sorting it down to 4, but here's number 1. There's this myth that talent is easy to identify and assess. And I want to start in an odd place, maybe with sports and maybe music. There's this guy named John Wooden, you might know, as a 10-time national champion coach. He's beloved by a bunch of players that are famous. He's also an author. And he taught in his 9 books a whole bunch of insight into success as a pyramid, as a way of life and decision making. And he basically is saying that we need to take the data we've got and make smarter decisions. But let's look at examples. Who's the dude on the left? Kat, you know?
I can't think of the player.
Well, William, you know, because you're a sports nut.
Michael Jordan.
Michael Jordan. So what do you know about Michael Jordan?
I know he didn't make his. Well, he's one of the best. He's the best basketball player ever.
That's a great bottom line. Right. And he was cut from his high school basketball team. He was eventually a walk-on at Chapel Hill, and he led the Bulls to 6 national championships. You're right. NBA Most Valuable Player icon for somebody named Nike. So talent assessment. Somebody's goofed up at some point in their young careers. Do you know this dude on the right, Wayne?
3-point champion.
He is now.
Steph Curry.
Steph Curry, right. So in Charlotte, where I used to live and just moved from, this guy is a local hero. But he wasn't, in college, able to play in the D1 colleges that he wanted to, Virginia Tech, for instance. So he went to a small local school called Davidson on the north side of Charlotte. And they led them to the Sweet 16, first time in their history. And then led the NCAA for 2 years in 3 points and played in the Olympics, Golden State Warrior, NBA All-Star team. I'll also add from our neighborhood admissions director, the uptick in admission as a result of Steph Curry, the impact of a star in your company, that uptick increased 30-some%, 30 to 35%, I forgot the exact number, not just in the year that they went to the Sweet 16, but it increased for the following 3 years. So when you think about star players in your organization, think of those 2 guys, Michael Jordan, Steph Curry. In music, you might know of these 2 dudes in Liverpool, England, named Paul McCartney and George Harrison. And you might know that their high school music teacher said they lacked any musical talent. Pretty ironic. So when I think about how often do we make mistakes in talent management and talent assessment, not just with younger people, but with all the folks in our organizations, I want to know why. So talent is easy to identify and assess. That's just a total myth. The fact is, oops, I went the wrong direction, is that it's an art and a science. And even though there's this creepy image of Einstein and Mona Lisa, the science will take us so far, and then we can make decisions thereafter. Once we figure out the organizational requirements, we analyze the candidates, we create a short list, and we can make our decision. Please comment on the chat section. I suspect most of you use this 9-box talent assessment. And the reason you probably do is that it was developed by Jack Welch at GE and others as a system to engineer people processes. And it's commonly used for talent management and succession planning. But my beef with it, and one of the reasons it's a limited model, is it's impossible to objectively measure potential. Kat, for instance, is she a low, moderate, or high potential person? I know she's brilliant, so I would tend to put her in that high place, right, a 1, 4, 7. And then I look at performance, which is pretty easy to track. Well, the problem with this model is that your hypos, Jill, you're probably an expert in this, are in the top 30%, and that's quadrants 4, 7, and 8. Well, those are the folks who should get 1.5 or 3 times the resources. You give them more money, you give them autonomy, but that demotivates the rest of the group. And Welch would say the bottom left group, the 3-box, should be fired every year. Well, that skews your performance, and it forces people with potentially very strong teams to let go of someone every year. If you've got 10 people and one person has to be defined as a 3-box, a low, then you've got to let them go. And what do you do with the majority in the 1, 2, 5, 6, or 9 boxes? These are folks who, not always, but are rarely encouraged to change their behaviors. So Jill, you're not alone. You said we use it. We're getting ready to do your annual talent assessment. Most large organizations do. Google, Novartis. And some of these groups are trending. Instead of having the HR business folks do the 9-box, they're using the senior business leaders. So they use this for a calibration process. And these are really argumentative. How many people do you have in your group who exceed their expectations or far exceed their expectations? And another, constraint compound with this model is timing. If, for instance, the classic one is somebody decides to have a child and she's gone for 6 months out of a 12-month career, and she's being assessed by her manager, does that mean, in fact, that she's lower because she is supporting another perfect value for her to raise a family? So this is a model you will see that helps with the science, but it has a huge amount of artfulness included. The very best, I think, the 9-box can be thought of as a snapshot for both data and capacity. Any comments or other examples?
This is a way I've used to slice research data. We get their 9-box performance, or however you classify. Performance ratings, whether it's just their high potential or not.
So you know that they were hypos in one of these 3 boxes, I guess, and then what?
Well, and then that's how you can use your focus. So maybe your turnover of your high potentials is very high, so we can slice exit interview data, engagement data, whatever it may be, to really focus on that population.
Right. And I think that's where we typically spend our money. I hope that those on the call are doing that. So that's myth number 1 out of 4. Here's myth number 2. Talent competencies are a static thing. We can train anybody to do this job. Put a square hole or a square box in a round hole. I said it backwards. Well, William, I can't do your job. Kat, I certainly can't do your job. And if anybody asked me to, I would be out the door. And yet, at a lot of companies, there are all these competencies like customer focus, emotional intelligence, business acumen, communication skills. And you might have a rating from the self and the managers and recommended coaches, internal or external, and action steps. That's how most companies manage the career track. Ken, I know from our conversation at Proficient, you guys are experts in this. You're experts in management consulting. But that's the myth. Competencies are not static. In fact, look at those 4. Talent competencies vary organizationally, so I want to pop the balloon here. Customer focus could be measured in a lot of ways. Customer satisfaction surveys, sales, referrals. How do you develop it? You see some examples. How do you reward it? Spot bonuses, promotions. For instance, if John is reassigned to a new region in November of last quarter, that's going to affect that competency. So there's an organizational impact. In addition, wait on the next slide, there's an individual impact of who did I pick on? Jennifer this time. So if customer focus is part of the competency map for somebody named Joe Bright. Do you like that? Right. And his current rating is a 5 out of 10, and his manager is Jennifer Starr. And Jennifer says to Joe Bright, well, he's got some development needs. You're a 4 out of 11 in these areas on your individual development plan. Well, that's a thing. That's a point of data. What are the KSAs? What are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that he needs to develop? He's already a friendly guy. He likes other people. He might be impatient. And, oh, by the way, there's 3 customer complaints in the last 19 months for this guy. Well, that's an example of talent competencies that vary individually. So what do? You 3 are experts. You do this all the time. You consider a site rotation, like hospitals are masterful at this. Some global companies are masterful at site rotation. Maybe you've got a rotation to another geography, an international appointment. My nephew is at Cargill, for instance. This 27-year-old whiz kid has an international assignment to develop his career. Mentoring is an example. Coaching is an example. Training and customer service, all the online stuff that companies sell and people rarely use. There's a 30% user rate. In my opinion, that's horrible. And video role plays and feedback sessions. Maybe this guy, Joe, just needs to be reassigned, and that's perhaps the best thing in his career. So there's a brilliant long comment here from Jill. I'm going to read it to everybody. Jill says, why don't you read it?
Leaders really struggle with where they put people in this box, going back to the 9-box talent assessment.
Yep.
And they always want to know how many they should have there. They did do analysis to see how many people they promoted that were medium or no potential, and they promoted them all.
Great example. And if you could go back on to that slide as well. No, you did. I love this example. There are companies that will say you've got to have a perfect bell curve, and there are companies that have too many on the bar exceeds and exceeds. So calibration has shifted in the last few years, and I think it's because we're doing a better job of sharing data. Consequently, if you're a company with a 1 to 5 gradation, there are clients that I have that will no longer have a 1 or a 5. In effect, it's a 2, 3, 4 gradation. So to your point, Jill, you might have a CFO, and I'm picking on CFOs because they sometimes make these decisions. This person might say, well, you can only have 1 hypo in the 4, 7, or 8 box for every 10%, not 30%.
Are you recommending moving away from this model?
I'm recognizing it as a reality in our lives. This is fun. We get a little more interactive. I like it. And yeah, it's impossible to measure the potential of William or Doug or Kat or anybody. So we're stuck with it at many companies. I think we need to be smarter about the calibration process before calibration, during it, and afterwards. And I think we need to be really smart about the rewards that are tied to compensating our hypos. There are plenty of examples of people who get a bonus that's 2x or 3x or 5x, and somebody else learns about it, and they're totally frustrated and demotivated. So I think we're probably going to continue to use it, Jill. More comments, William?
Yeah, they're not force ranking as organizations do, but managers don't want to.
Managers don't want to what? Force rank?
They do want to.
Managers do want to force rank. It'll be interesting to see if they do after two rounds of calibration meetings. I've coached leaders at Deloitte, PwC, and pharmaceuticals who are overwhelmed by that calibration process. It's like a boxing match sometimes. And they've all got margins, they've all got the money to distribute, so it's not like they're in that manufacturing company example I just mentioned. But it's a contentious time. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves at Jill's company. Any other comments? Thank you for a little bit of interaction. So where are we? We just wrapped up with talent competencies that vary individually, and we're ready to move on to myth number 3, I think. Kat, you're great at stats, and you're great at slides, and you, unlike me, I've got 2 kids in college. But if y'all can see this slide, it's dramatic, and I picked it for the drama factor. Did you know that there's a diminishing financial return in higher education? The blue line represents tuition and room and board, which is escalating phenomenally from in the 80s, whatever it is, maybe 40K, to 2010, when the tuition, room and board cost for a 4-year degree and $95K. So for our 2 girls in college, I should definitely say, don't go to college, right, Wayne?
Yeah, tell them to learn trade.
And then the red line indicates the bachelor's degree earning. Well, there's this myth out there that you can't trust statistics, but there's lots of problems with this chart. You guys probably have some observations already. What are some problems with this chart, if you want? The cost of not going to college, for instance, isn't represented here. There's a multiplying effect, the return on investment. Kat, I'd argue if I were your folks and I'd support your education at Vanderbilt, that it's had a huge accumulating effect.
And it doesn't take into account the experiences that you get that can't necessarily be quantified in the hard costs.
For instance, all those contacts and social network and people, is that what you were thinking of?
Yeah, and just life experiences,
Right.
things that you're exposed to that you maybe wouldn't have been exposed to elsewhere.
I agree. Our 2 girls have said that that's the reason why they need to be in sororities. I'm not sure about that argument. Another misconception in this thing is that it appears that the blue line's got no end in sight. It's just going to go up and up and up in a 1-to-1 ratio. So as a dad, what am I going to do? I'm going to keep my kid at home, right? It escalates the fears of most parents. And this overlapping 2 different scales is the problem with this chart. The long-term value of a 45K per year investment over 40 years is $1.2 million, according to the U.S. Department of Labor. So you could maybe say that I'm not going to look at a $1.2 million return on that kid's college education. Or you could say, these stats are telling the truth. So there's a lot of misrepresentation of statistics. Look at all the blogs that you know of. And in fact, stats should be used to inform. I didn't realize until a minute ago that there's a watermark behind this, but a smaller sample population should in fact represent a larger sample population. There's always the hard data on the left, and there's a gap between whatever we could infer or conclude from that small sample. So this is where Kat and our research solutions team has really had a tremendous impact on the market. We use quantitative and qualitative data to figure out what's going on in companies with engagement interviews, state interviews, so folks can say, well, this sample does in fact represent the larger population. Stats do inform. I think there's a lot of fear about statistics. To me, they're just numbers. How much do you weigh? It's a number. What's your diet and exercise? That's a number. What's your net worth? That's a number. Stats inform. And they represent an aspect of your organization. So please don't be afraid of stats. I just gave you several short examples. So let's get to the hotter topic. Consultants add value. This slide provokes many people. What I noticed about it is that all arrows are pointing in the same direction, which is, what can I sell? Let me sell you strategy or project performance or whatever. Why? Because I think I'm brilliant. You may know that the number 1 overall field for Ivy League graduates to go into is no longer finance and hedge funds. It's consulting. Number one for Ivy League grads. Well, why is that? I think it's because there's this mystique that there's some mystery of whatever it is that consultants do. And because of our pedigrees, yes, I went to an Ivy League school, so I'll say this with some confidence. That pedigree does not mean I'm any smarter than anybody else in the room. And it's certainly not any smarter than my clients, who are the experts in whatever it is that's going on in their organization. So the next time you hear of the thud factor, that's my hand on the table. So here's the thud. The thud factor is a real thing. I've worked with folks from McKinsey and BCG, Boston Consulting Group, and Bain. The thud factor is when you pay me $500,000 and I'll be in your site for 6 months and interview a bunch of people and provide you a bunch of PowerPoint slides. And what will I leave you with? A thick document, the thud factor. In my opinion, that's criminal. It's unethical. And in contrast, this isn't a great image, but I'd like to invite you to think about it being a client-centered process. Your consultants, in my opinion, should be experts. Think about your dentist. I don't go to the dentist for a subjective opinion. I go to the dentist to get something fixed. I go to the attorney to get something fixed. I go to the physician to get something fixed. Shouldn't I also turn off my phone? Sorry for that sound. Shouldn't I also go to my talent management consultant to get something fixed? There's a cost, there's an attrition problem, there's a turnover problem, there's this manager who has 70% attrition rate. This is a true story in a pharmaceutical company. And if the compensation for each of those people is $150 or $200K per year, and you're losing 80% per year, that's a problem. So you go to somebody as an external consultant to assess and help you fix it. So notice that these are all aspects of consultancy that are gaining momentum. Evidence-based consulting is a phrase you're going to hear more and more and more in the future. Metrics are hugely important. We have a group here that we host every month on talent analytics. The trends in talent analytics are profound, and that's probably the subject of another talk. Technology is making it possible to have transparent access to whatever is going on in your company. We've got some cutting-edge stuff, but yours is, I hope, much fancier. And you need to trust your dentist and attorney and your talent management consultants. It has to be a customized solution. The off-the-shelf, the DR or the DI stuff from, well, I guess I shouldn't mention them all, but they've been around. DDI and PDI and others, all that DI stuff off the shelf just doesn't work, and we know it. So you need some experts in your field to help. That's what I invite you to think about when you think about whoever your consultants might be ahead. So whatever your next steps are, here's a slide with the free software that we'll give to you guys. A bunch of people that we have some expertise with. But the point is to begin a conversation. So we're at 12:42 my time. We can't open the phones unless you guys do. Happy to close off 15 minutes early. Happy to deal with your questions if you should have any. Or wisdom from Kat. Or wisdom from William. Any comments out there? Talent management should not be a mystery, in my opinion. It should be an ongoing process. There's plenty of methodology that we can give you or help you with at any time. So if we can be a resource, let us know. Thanks for joining this little call, and we will send you the slides. Thank you, Kat.
No problem.
Thank you, William.
You got it.
Bye, everybody. I miss the interaction and talking to people.
What was wrong with the line?